Hey class, welcome back to the History of Christianity. I hope everyone's doing well today. Last time we looked at the beginning of the Reformation and the life of Martin Luther and what he did and some of his theology. And today we are going to move into an examination of the life of Ulrich Zwingli. Stay tuned for the PowerPoint. Okay class, we're going to have our PowerPoint lecture on Ulrich Zwingli. And there's a picture of him there on the front. Okay, so his name's Ulrich Zwingli, 1484 to 1531. Sometimes you'll hear his first name called Huldrych, spelled there for you, but we also call him Ulrich Zwingli. Okay, so his timeline, born in 1484 at Waldhaus, Switzerland. 1506, he's ordained a priest in the Catholic Church. 1518, he begins preaching Reformation theology in the Catholic Church, and so that's a year after Martin Luther sparked the Reformation. So he begins preaching Reformed theology in the Catholic Church itself. 1519, he's appointed chief preacher in Zurich, Switzerland. 1520, he renounced papal pensions. 1522, ministry in Zurich is going on there, and he does a few things. He attacks indulgences, he attacked fasting at Lent, and he attacked clerical celibacy. And it's then in 1522, 5 years after the Reformation began, he resigned from the Catholic Church. So he's actually a priest in the Catholic Church, and he's he's basically looking like a Protestant reformer. 1523, the Zurich disputations are held, which we'll talk about that in a moment. 1524, he marries Anna Reinhardt, and there she is on the right. 1525 begins this conflict and attacks on the Anabaptists, which we're going to have a separate lecture on the Anabaptists, but we're going to talk about what took place with the Anabaptists and Zwingli here in this PowerPoint. And then in 1531, he dies. So basic info on Zwingli: German-speaking Swiss, a leader during the Reformation in Switzerland. He sought intellectual, biblical, and political reform, so kind of hit the whole gamut there. He rejected clerical celibacy, the sacramental system, purgatory, intercession of saints, and use of images in places of worship. And he was also highly nationalistic. Okay, so he was not like a pacifist in any way. He was highly nationalistic, and he would actually go to battle. He had an outstanding library of 350 works by the original church fathers. So think back to the patristic period. He had a library with 350 of their works. Now, again, at that time period, that would have been difficult to collect and put together, but he had that. So a pretty good library. Rejected medieval scholasticism. He had a heavy emphasis on reasoning, so kind of more of that humanistic thought. He possibly may have met Erasmus. He was very devoted to the humanists of his day, and he memorized the Pauline Corpus in Erasmus's 1516 edition of the New Testament. So, again, very, very smart man to be able to memorize Paul's writings. 1506, he's ordained and appointed parish priest at Glarus, and he served as a military chaplain and got involved in politics, and he served as pastor for 10 years. So this whole point about being nationalistic, and then here he's serving as a military chaplain, and that's going to lead to his death. So ministry at Zurich, 1522, he ignored the liturgy, completely ignored liturgy. He was an expository preacher, which means he didn't read a sermon from some liturgical book that was written by somebody else. He took the Bible and he broke down the verses and he exposed, or he was expository in his preaching. On beginning his work in Zurich, he caused consternation by preaching an exposition of the Gospels in German, and that scorning the assigned lessons and the Latin tongue of the Roman Church. So he was preaching in the people's language instead of in Latin. He questioned dietary laws concerning choice and freedom of food, was a book that he wrote. And again, he renounced papal pensions. January 1523, he's involved in the First Zurich Disputation. And here there's the 67 articles. And these articles went beyond Martin Luther in laying out an evangelical position. He emphasized the authority of Scripture, salvation by grace through faith, and the priesthood of the believer. So it's more of an evangelistic tone to the 67 articles. He rejected as unscriptural the Roman sacramental system, purgatory, the intercession of the saints, and clerical celibacy. And he was able to justify to the Zurich government eliminating images, relics, monasteries, and the traditional observance of Mass. Now, one thing that takes place is you're going to start seeing the city governments, like the civil servants or the city board or the city council, they're called different things, but the city governments in these areas that the Reformation is rolling through, and they're either going to side with the reformers or they're not going to side with the reformers. And when they side with the reformers and that city becomes Protestant, it becomes a Protestant city, the reformers themselves, such as Zwingli here, would pressure the government of the city to act as the authority to eliminate these ecclesiastical items within their city. So images or even monasteries, and the city would go in and close them down or remove them. You'll see that with Zwingli, you'll see that with Calvin in Geneva. So the city will align with the reformer and then do basically what the reformer is preaching, or the city will reject the reformer and that city will stay a Roman Catholic city. October 1523 is the Second Zurich Disputation. He exercised great influence of Zurich, allowing him to develop his program of reform. The city council judged him to be victorious in 2 public disputations with the Roman Catholic representatives. So Zwingli basically beat in debate and in the councils. He basically won all of the argument. And so they viewed Zwingli as the one that basically put the Roman Catholic Church in its place. Well, the outcome of this in Zurich was that they abolished the Mass in Zurich, the internment of the relics of the saints, so they basically took the relics and buried them, the smashing of the organ in the cathedral in Zurich. They destroyed the organ. They were also given permission to eat meat during Lent, and they gave permission for the priests to marry. So obviously if they're priests, and they may have been called priests, but if they're Protestant, they would be more like pastors. They could then marry. Background of Anabaptist trouble. So we start seeing Zwingli having a problem here with the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists, and like I said, we're going to have a separate PowerPoint on them, but the Anabaptists, it basically means rebaptize. And what it meant was that if a person was baptized as an infant and then they become a believer, then they must be baptized again by immersion. And we might not think like that big of a deal, especially if someone is a Catholic today and they get saved and they go to, let's say, a Baptist church and they want to join the Baptist church, and they'll be baptized by immersion and they'll join the Baptist church. We don't really think too much of it today, but back then it was a huge deal. And so the Anabaptists said people need to be rebaptized. And they had an issue with infant baptism because they didn't see infant baptism in the Bible. Well, Zwingli maintained the practice of infant baptism as a confirmation, and he actually vehemently opposed the Anabaptists. So he was involved in the early troubles with the Anabaptists. Okay, so we're going to look at 2 guys here. We're going to look at Conrad Grebel and Felix Mons. Conrad Grebel studied with Zwingli for about 4 years. So these guys are studying together, and Zwingli attempted to retain the infant baptism. But Grebel, Felix Mons, he's the second guy, and other supporters insisted that he must discontinue this practice if he wanted to be consistent in his main principle, to restore the scriptural pattern. So Zwingli wanted to restore a scriptural pattern, but he kept hanging on to this infant baptism idea with his colleagues, Grebel and Felix Mons and some others. They were rejecting it. Conrad Grebel was, and that's him there on the right, he began formulating Anabaptist beliefs, and he was actually studying the New Testament with Zwingli. So at first, they were together, but there's going to be a big split. And then second is Felix Mons, and there's a picture of him. He rejected infant baptism. Okay, so the city council said, you need to recant of your beliefs and have your baby baptized. And he refused that. Instead, he went and held adult baptisms, and he was arrested. And we're just going to run down through the story quick of what takes place. The death of Felix Mons. On January 5th, 1527, Felix was led from prison to a boat. On the way there, he gave praises to God and preached to the people that had gathered to watch him die. One of Zwingli's priests went along, still trying to have him recant. Mons' brother and mother were there as well, and they're urging him, don't recant, you need to stand fast. He was put into a boat on the river Lamont. His hands were tied, and he was made to squat down, and a stick was stuck behind his knees and above his elbows, so it immobilized him. And then he was rowed out into the middle of the river. And there, with his mothers and brother and fellow rebaptizers or Anabaptists, they're shouting encouragement. He was dumped into the lake or into the river, and a final death by baptism occurred. So that's what they did, was they basically said, if you want to be preaching this second baptism or rebaptizing, then you're going to die by your baptism. He was not horrified or afraid. His last words were, into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. And he was martyred for believers' baptism. Now, persecution would continue by the Catholic Church against reformers, but also the Protestant groups began persecuting Anabaptists. Here's a picture of the death of Felix Mons. He's over here getting ready to be pulled into the boat to go out and dump him in the water. October 11th, 1531, Zwingli is killed in the Battle of Kappel. 1 hour battle between Protestant and Catholic armies. And there's a 19th century picture entitled "The Murder of Zwingli" by Carl Jocelyn. And you see Zwingli there in front of the tree, and he's about to be killed there. And that's it for this PowerPoint. I'll see you in a second. Okay, class, that's it for today. Next time we'll be looking at the reformer John Calvin. Have a great day.